My son's wealth never changed him. That's the part most people don't believe. What changed everything was living under his roof. I didn't grow up with much, so when my son made it big, I was proud. Not impressed, just proud. Money never mattered to me the way it seems to matter to everyone else. What mattered was that he stayed the same boy I raised, and for the most part, he did. His name is Daniel Rowe. He's my only child. Daniel was always gentle. Even as a kid, he held doors open without being told and apologized when he bumped into someone, even if it wasn't his fault. When his business took off, people expected him to change, start acting important, start acting distant. He didn't. He still called me every Sunday, still asked if I needed anything, still listened, actually listened when I talked. That's why, when he suggested I come stay with him for a while, I didn't hesitate. "You don't have to, but I'd like you close." That sounded like my son, not like a billionaire, just like Daniel. I sold my little place after a fall scare, nothing serious, but enough to make us both think. He offered his home without conditions, or so I thought. His house wasn't a house the way mine had been. It was large, yes, but not flashy. Clean lines, quiet rooms, everything in its place. You could tell money lived there, but it didn't shout about it. At least, not to me. Daniel greeted me at the door with the same smile he'd had since he was 10. He took my bag himself, even though someone else could have done it. "Mom, you're home," he said. Home. That word stuck with me. His wife, Claire, stood behind him. She smiled too, polite, measured, the kind of smile that looks correct in photos. "Welcome," she said. Not welcome home, just welcome. I didn't think much of it at the time. First days are always awkward. I told myself to give it time. The first week went smoothly. Daniel was busy, but he made time. Breakfast together when he could, a quick check-in before bed. He made sure I was comfortable. Claire handled the house. She always had. At first, her rules seemed small, harmless. This cabinet's organized a certain way. That chair is more for guests. We usually eat at 6. Usually. I adjusted. It wasn't my house, after all. I wasn't raised to cause friction where I was offered kindness. But little things started piling up. I noticed I was always seated at the far end of the table, that my mail was moved before I saw it, that certain rooms were quietly closed off. Nothing was said outright. That was the clever part. Daniel didn't see any of it. He was gone most of the day. Meetings, calls, travel. When he was home, Claire was attentive, supportive, the perfect partner. I didn't want to be that mother, the one who complains, who makes problems where there aren't any. So I stayed quiet. But I paid attention. That's something people forget about women my age. They think quiet means unaware. It doesn't. It means observant. I noticed the way Claire spoke when Daniel wasn't around. Softer, but sharper. I noticed how she'd step in to answer questions meant for me. "She's fine with that," Claire would say. Was I? I noticed how my routines slowly disappeared. My morning walks shortened, my kitchen time limited, my opinions politely bypassed. It was subtle, enough that if I brought it up, it would sound like nothing. That's how she played it. One afternoon, I reached for a mug I'd used all week. "Oh," Claire said, gently removing it from my hand. "That one's part of a set." A set I'd been using. She handed me another. I smiled and took it. Inside, something shifted. Not anger, not yet. Awareness. I started seeing the pattern, the quiet decisions made without me, the way my presence was tolerated, not embraced. And still, Daniel stayed the same. That's what made it confusing.
When he was home, I was his mom. When he wasn't, I was something else. A guest, a responsibility, a variable to be managed. I began to understand that wealth doesn't just buy comfort, it buys control, and Claire knew exactly how to use it. She never raised her voice, never snapped, never did anything I could point to. That's what made it effective. One evening, Daniel and I sat in the living room while Claire took a call upstairs. "You settling in okay?" he asked. I looked at my son, really looked at him. "Yes," I said. That wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. He smiled, relieved. "Good, I was worried." "I don't need to worry," I said. But I did. Not about him, about what was happening right under his roof. I didn't speak up that night. I didn't speak up the next day either. But the first time Claire made a decision about me, one that Daniel would have never agreed to, I realized staying quiet wasn't the same as staying powerless. And that's when I started keeping track.
The first thing I learned was this: power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up as convenience, sometimes as help, sometimes as a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Once I started paying attention, I couldn't stop. Claire never did anything outright cruel. That's what made it hard to explain, even to myself. Everything she did came wrapped in reason, efficiency, order. If I mentioned I liked the window open in the mornings, she'd say, "The house system works better sealed." If I cooked breakfast early, she'd gently remind me that the kitchen staff came later and didn't like surprises. Kitchen staff. I nodded and stepped aside. Daniel wasn't home much that week, a trip overseas, big meetings. He checked in every night, though, asked how I was feeling, asked if I needed anything. I told him no. That was true. I didn't need things. I needed space and respect. But I wasn't ready to put that into words yet. I wanted to be sure. One morning, I woke up earlier than usual and went down to the kitchen. Old habits. Coffee first, then the paper. I'd done that routine for decades. The lights were already on. Claire was there, talking quietly to one of the house staff. When she saw me, the conversation stopped mid-sentence. "Oh," she said, "you're up early." "I usually am," I replied. She smiled tightly. "We're just finishing up here." She motioned toward the counter where my newspaper used to sit. Used to. I like to keep mornings streamlined, less clutter. Clutter. I looked around. Everything was spotless, coldly perfect. "I'll wait," I said. She nodded and went back to her conversation, lowering her voice again. I stood there, suddenly unsure where I fit in that room. Later that day, my friend Margaret called. We'd known each other since before Daniel was born. She asked how I was settling in. "Fine," I said. She paused. "That's not your fine voice." I almost laughed. "Give it time," I said. That became my phrase. Give it time. Time passed, and things didn't improve. They narrowed. My walks were suddenly inconvenient because security preferred schedules. My favorite chair in the den was reserved. My laundry disappeared and came back folded in a way that erased any sign of me. I felt myself shrinking in that house. Not physically, socially. Claire never said, "This is not your place." She didn't have to. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone. "She's adjusting," she said. "Yes, of course. We're making it work." We. I wasn't part of that we. That night, Daniel came home late. He was tired but cheerful, the way he always was when work went well. He hugged me, asked how my day was. "Quiet," I said. He smiled. "That's good." Claire joined us a moment later, already steering the conversation.
Your mom had a calm day. Everything went smoothly. Smoothly. Daniel nodded, reassured. I watched the exchange carefully. This was the pattern. Claire spoke for me, Daniel listened to her, and I faded into the background. Not because he didn't care, because he trusted her. That was the hardest part to accept. Trust can be a shield or a blindfold. I decided to test something small. The next day, I changed my routine, sat in a different place at lunch. Nothing dramatic. Claire noticed immediately. "Oh," she said, pausing, "we usually don't sit there." "Today I am," I replied. She smiled tightly. "It's just not ideal." "For who?" I asked. There it was. A flicker. Brief, almost imperceptible. "For the flow," she said. I stayed seated. She didn't argue. She adjusted the table around me instead, creating space where there shouldn't have been any. Later, I found my chair moved back. Message received. That night, I wrote everything down. Dates, moments, words. Not because I planned to confront anyone, not yet, because clarity matters. People like Claire rely on doubt, on the idea that you'll second-guess yourself. I wasn't going to do that. A week later, something bigger happened. Daniel mentioned casually that Claire had been thinking about rearranging the guest wing. "That's where you're staying now," he said gently. "It might be quieter for you." Guest wing. I smiled. "Oh, that sounds thoughtful," I said. Claire nodded, pleased. I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger, resolve. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about positioning. I realized something important. Claire didn't want conflict. She wanted control, quiet control, and she assumed I wouldn't push back. She assumed wrong. I didn't speak up that night. Instead, I asked questions about schedules, about plans, about how long temporary arrangements were meant to last. Claire answered smoothly, too smoothly. Daniel listened, thoughtful. I could see the gears turning in his head. He hadn't noticed before, but now he was starting to. That's the thing about truth. You don't have to throw it, you just have to place it where it can't be ignored. Claire still thought she was managing the situation. She didn't know I'd stopped reacting and started preparing. And the next decision she made, without asking me, was the one that finally forced my son to look closer at what was happening under his own roof.
The moment I knew things had crossed from uncomfortable into intentional came on a Thursday afternoon. Daniel was still out of town. Another conference, another late-night call where he apologized for being busy and promised we'd catch up properly when he got back. I told him it was fine, and it was, mostly. That afternoon, I went looking for a folder I kept with me at all times. Nothing important to anyone else, just personal papers, handwritten notes, a few old letters and documents I liked to have nearby. I'd placed it in the small cabinet beside my bed. It wasn't there. At first, I thought I'd moved it. I checked the dresser, the nightstand, even the closet. Nothing. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at the empty space where it had been. My stomach tightened, not from panic, but from recognition. This wasn't a mistake. I went downstairs slowly. The house was quiet, that artificial quiet that comes from thick walls and soft flooring. Claire was in the sitting room, scrolling on her tablet, posture perfect as always. "Claire," I said, keeping my voice even, "have you seen a blue folder? I keep it upstairs." She looked up just long enough to register the question. "Oh," she said lightly. "Yes, I had it moved." "Moved? To where?" I asked. "I put it in storage. We're reorganizing. It's better not to have loose papers lying around." Storage. That word hit different. "I didn't ask for it to be moved," I said. She smiled. "I know. but it's taken care of." Taken care of. I stood there, waiting for her to add something, an apology maybe, an explanation. She didn't. "Where is it?" I asked again. She tapped on her tablet. "I can have someone retrieve it later." Later. I nodded slowly. "I'd like it now." She paused, just a beat too long. "It's not urgent," she said, "and the staff is busy." I looked at her then, really looked. This wasn't about organization, this was about authority. "Claire," I said calmly, "those are my things." She met my gaze. "And this is my house." There it was. Not loud, not angry. Clear. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Please have it brought back." She studied me for a moment, as if deciding how far she could push. "I'll see what I can do," she said finally. That evening, the folder appeared on my bed, neatly stacked, slightly out of order. I went through it page by page. Nothing missing, but something had shifted. I called Margaret that night. "She moved my personal papers," I said. Margaret didn't hesitate. "That's not okay." "No," I agreed, "it's not." "Have you told Daniel?" she asked. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because I want him to see it himself." Margaret sighed. "You've always been patient." "Patience isn't the same as passivity," I said. The next few days felt different, heavier. Claire stopped pretending as much. She didn't hide her irritation when I asked questions, didn't soften her tone when she corrected me. Small decisions became larger ones. One morning, she mentioned that the guest wing would be more appropriate for me long-term. "Long-term?" I asked. "It's more private," she said, "and it makes things easier." "Easier for who?" I asked. She didn't answer. When Daniel returned home that weekend, I could see the relief on his face. He hugged me tightly, holding a second longer than usual. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. Again, not the whole truth. Claire joined us, slipping seamlessly into the conversation. "We've been making some adjustments," she said, "just to help your mom settle in." Daniel looked at me. "That okay with you?" I smiled. "We've been talking." Claire nodded. That wasn't exactly true. Later that night, Daniel and I sat on the patio. He poured us both a drink. The air was warm, the city lights distant but visible. "You seem quieter," he said. "Do I?" I asked. He nodded. "A little." I considered my words carefully. "Daniel," I said, "do you feel like everything in this house works the way you think it does?" He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are decisions made the same way when you're not here?" He hesitated. "I trust Claire," he said. "I know you do, and I'm not asking you not to." That caught his attention. "But," I added, "trust doesn't mean not checking in." He leaned back in his chair. "Has something happened?" he asked. I thought about the folder, the chair, the quiet rules. "Things have changed," I said carefully. "Not in big ways, in small ones." "Like what?" I shrugged. "It's hard to explain unless you're watching closely." He studied me for a long moment. "Are you unhappy here?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "I'm uncomfortable." "There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "Okay, let me think about that." That was enough for now. I didn't want an argument, I wanted awareness. Over the next week, I noticed Daniel paying closer attention, asking more questions, noticing interruptions, watching how Claire answered for me. Claire noticed too. She became sharper, less patient. One evening, she corrected me in front of guests. Another time, she dismissed something I said with a laugh. Daniel's jaw tightened. Still, he said nothing. Not yet. The final straw came quietly. Claire informed me that she'd arranged a schedule for my days. A schedule. "You'll be more comfortable with structure," she said. I looked at the paper she handed me. Meals, walks, visitors, everything decided. "For your convenience," she added.
I folded the paper and handed it back. "No," I said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated. "That won't work for me." She straightened. "This is how the house runs." "And I don't," I replied. She stared at me, clearly not used to resistance. "I'll talk to Daniel," she said coolly. "I hope you do," I said. That night, Daniel found me in the kitchen. "Claire says you refused a schedule," he said. "I did," I replied. "Why?" "Because I wasn't asked, I was informed." He was quiet. "That's not okay," he said finally. Not loud, not angry. Firm. Claire stood in the doorway listening. Daniel looked at her. "We need to talk," he said. And in that moment, I knew things were about to change. That conversation didn't happen that night. Claire avoided it. But the next step she took, trying to lock me into a decision I couldn't undo, forced my son to confront what had been happening all along. And once he saw it clearly, there was no going back.
The conversation Daniel promised didn't happen that night. Claire had a way of avoiding things without making it obvious. She suddenly had calls to take, emails to answer, a headache that required rest. By the time Daniel came looking for her, she was already upstairs with the door closed. "I'll talk to her tomorrow," he said. I nodded. No rush. That wasn't entirely true, but pressure wouldn't help. I'd waited this long. I could wait a little longer. The next morning, I woke up to a house that felt different. Not quieter, not louder. Sharper. Claire was polite again, almost overly so. She asked if I'd slept well, offered me coffee herself instead of signaling to staff. It was a performance, and I recognized it for what it was. Daniel noticed, too. He watched her the way people do when something's been pointed out and they can't unsee it. When she spoke for me, his eyes flicked my way. When she redirected a conversation, his shoulders stiffened. He didn't interrupt. Not yet. Later that afternoon, he suggested we all sit down together, just the three of us. We gathered in the living room, sunlight pouring in through the tall windows. Claire sat perfectly straight, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap. Daniel leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. I took the chair I liked, the one I'd quietly reclaimed. "Mom mentioned feeling uncomfortable," Daniel began. Claire turned to me with a look of practiced concern. "I had no idea," she said. "You should have said something." I met her gaze. "I tried." She blinked. "When?" I didn't answer right away. "Daniel," I said instead, "do you know where my personal papers were last week?" He frowned. "Your papers?" "They were moved without my knowledge, placed in storage." Claire inhaled sharply. I explained that. Daniel looked at her. "You moved Mom's things." "I was organizing. It wasn't malicious." "Did you ask her first?" Silence. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Okay." Claire shifted. "You're making this sound worse than it is." "I'm trying to understand," he replied. I didn't pile on. I let the moment breathe. "There have been other things," I said calmly. "Schedules, seating, decisions made for me." Claire's jaw tightened. "I was trying to help." "I know, but help feels different when it's invited." Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Claire," he said, "why didn't you tell me about this stuff?" "I didn't think it mattered," she replied quickly. "She's staying with us. The house has to run smoothly." "At whose expense?" he asked. That question hung in the air. Claire looked stunned, not angry, just caught off guard. She wasn't used to being questioned like that. "I never meant to disrespect her," she said finally. "But you did," Daniel replied, not accusing, just stating a fact. The conversation ended shortly after that. No yelling, no slammed doors, just an understanding that something wasn't right. I went to my room afterward, feeling oddly calm. Later that evening, Daniel knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" he asked. We sat on the edge of the bed like we used to when he was younger and needed advice. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have noticed sooner." I put my hand over his. "You trusted your wife. That's not a flaw." "I don't want you feeling like you don't belong here." "I don't, but I need space to be myself." He nodded. "I'll fix this." I believed him. The next few days were tense, but different. Claire was distant now, controlled. She didn't correct me, didn't rearrange things around me. She watched instead. Daniel made small changes, asked my opinion openly, waited for my answers, made it clear I wasn't just a guest passing through. But I could feel something building. Claire wasn't done. One afternoon, she brought me a document. "I thought this might make things clearer," she said, placing it on the table. It was an agreement about temporary living arrangements, language about timelines, expectations. "I don't recall asking for this," I said. "It's just to avoid confusion," she replied. I skimmed it, slowly. "Daniel hasn't seen this," I said. She hesitated. "I planned to show him." "I'd prefer to discuss it together," I said, sliding it back. She smiled tightly. "Of course." That night, Daniel saw it. "What is this?" he asked her. She shrugged. "Just something to keep things organized." He looked at me. "Did you ask for this?" "No," I said. He turned back to her. "Why would you draft something like this without talking to either of us?" Claire's composure cracked just a little. "Because nothing was getting resolved." Daniel stood up. "This isn't how we resolve things." The air felt heavy. Claire crossed her arms. "So what? She just stays forever?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "If that's what she wants." She stared at him. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud, but final. Later, Daniel came to me again. "I don't know where this leaves things," he admitted. "With time and honesty." He nodded. That night, I slept deeply. For the first time since I arrived, I felt like myself again. But I also knew something else. Claire wouldn't let this go quietly, and whatever she tried next wouldn't be subtle. I didn't know what Claire's next move would be, but when she tried to involve someone outside the family, without telling my son, she crossed a line even she couldn't smooth over, and that's when everything truly came into the open.
The first sign that Claire had gone too far came in the form of a phone call I wasn't supposed to receive. It was late morning. Daniel had already left for work, and the house had settled into its usual quiet rhythm. I was in the sunroom reading when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Normally, I let unknown calls go to voicemail. That day, I didn't. "Hello?" I said. "Mrs. Rowe?" a woman asked. Her voice was professional, careful. "Yes?" "My name is Linda Harris. I'm calling from an advisory firm that works with the Rowe family." The Rowe family. That phrasing alone made my spine straighten. "I was told to reach out to you regarding your long-term arrangements," she continued. "We were asked to gather some information." "By whom?" I asked. There was a pause. "Mrs. Rowe," she said. "Claire." I closed my book slowly. "And what information would that be?" I asked. "Preferences. Housing, care support, timelines, things like that." Things like that. I wasn't aware any arrangements were being discussed, I said. "Oh," she replied, sounding surprised. "I assumed you were." "No," I said calmly. "I wasn't." Another pause, longer this time. "I see," Linda said. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." "Perhaps," I agreed. She thanked me for my time and ended the call. I sat there for a long moment afterward, letting the quiet settle. This wasn't subtle anymore. Claire hadn't just been making decisions about me. She'd started making plans around me. And she hadn't told Daniel. That afternoon, when Daniel came home earlier than expected, I asked him to sit with me. "Something happened today," I said. He looked at me immediately, alert. "What is it?" I told him about the call. Every word, no emotion added, just facts. His jaw tightened. "She contacted an advisory firm?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "About me." He stood up abruptly. "Without talking to either of us?" "It seems that way," I said. He paced the room once, then stopped. "That's not okay." "I know," I said. He didn't argue, didn't defend her, didn't minimize it. "I'll talk to her," he said. This time, he didn't say tomorrow. He went upstairs immediately. I stayed where I was. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know how it went. I could tell by the way his footsteps slowed when he came back down. "She said she was just planning ahead," he said quietly, sitting beside me. "Planning ahead for whom?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "She thought it was helpful," he said finally. I nodded. Intent and impact don't always match. He looked at me then, really looked. He said, "I'm starting to see that." The next few days were tense. Claire avoided me almost entirely. When we crossed paths, she was polite but distant. No more attempts to control, no more quiet rules. But something else had changed. Daniel stopped assuming. He asked me before plans were made, included me in conversations, checked in with me directly, and he watched Claire. I didn't ask him to. He just did. One evening we had dinner together, just the three of us. Claire was quiet, pushing food around her plate. Daniel broke the silence. "Claire," he said, "why did you contact an advisory firm about my mom?" She was startled. "I told you I was thinking long-term." "Without talking to either of us," he pressed. "I didn't think it was necessary." "That's the problem," he said. She looked at him. "You're taking her side." "I'm taking the truth seriously," he replied. The room went still. "I never meant to push her out," Claire said. "But you did," Daniel said. I didn't say a word. Claire stood up abruptly. "I need some air." She left the room. Daniel sighed, rubbing his face. "I don't recognize this version of her." "People show different sides under pressure," I said gently. He nodded. Later that night, Claire knocked on my door. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said. I looked at her calmly. "It went this far because you kept going." She swallowed. "I was trying to protect our life. I was never a threat to it." She didn't reply. The next day, Daniel made a decision. "I want to slow things down," he told her. "No more plans, no more decisions without everyone involved." She bristled. "You're overreacting." "No," he said. "I'm correcting something." I stayed out of it. This wasn't my fight. It was theirs. Over the next week, Claire grew restless. She complained about feeling undermined, about boundaries, about feeling watched. Daniel stayed calm, consistent. "I need transparency," he told her. "That's non-negotiable." That word, negotiable, landed hard. One afternoon, I overheard Claire on the phone again. This time, she wasn't quiet enough. "I didn't think he'd side with her," she said sharply. "She's temporary." Temporary. I stepped into the hallway. She froze when she saw me. "You shouldn't say things like that," I said calmly. She flushed. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant." She looked away. That evening, Daniel and I talked again. "She called me temporary," I said. He closed his eyes briefly. "That's it," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean I can't ignore this anymore. This isn't about miscommunication. It's about respect." The next conversation he had with Claire was longer, quieter, but heavier. When it ended, she packed a bag. "I need some space," she said.
Daniel nodded. That's probably a good idea. She left that night. The house felt different afterward. Not lighter, clearer. Daniel sat with me in the living room, exhausted. I'm sorry you went through this, he said. I'm proud of you, I replied. For what? For paying attention, I said, even when it was uncomfortable. He smiled faintly. I learned that from you. I went to bed that night knowing the hardest part was over, but I also knew one thing. Claire wasn't done yet. People who lose control quietly often try to regain it loudly. Claire didn't leave empty-handed, and the final thing she tried, after she was already out of the house, forced Daniel to make a decision that would permanently change the future of his family.
The house didn't feel empty after Claire left. It felt quieter, in a way that let you hear your own thoughts again. Daniel didn't say much the morning after. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen island, stared at his phone without really looking at it. I could tell he hadn't slept well. Neither had I. This wasn't how any of us imagined things would go. I'm sorry, he said again, finally. I should have shut this down earlier. You did when it mattered. That's what counts. He nodded, but the weight was still there. Claire didn't disappear quietly. By mid-morning, Daniel's phone started buzzing. Messages, missed calls, long texts that went unanswered. She wants to talk, he said, rubbing his forehead. About what? I asked. About everything, he replied. And nothing. I didn't tell him what to do. I never had. Daniel always made his own decisions best when he wasn't pushed. Around noon, I got another call. Same number as before. Linda Harris. Mrs. Rowe, she said carefully, I wanted to follow up on our conversation from earlier this week. I closed my eyes briefly. Yes? We've received additional instructions, she said. I felt it was appropriate to clarify them directly with you. Instructions from whom? I asked, though I already knew. From Claire, she replied. There it was. And what kind of instructions? I asked. Regarding possible transitions, she said. Alternate living arrangements, timing, support options. Support options? I didn't authorize any of that, I said calmly. I understand, she replied. That's why I wanted to speak with you before proceeding. I appreciate that. Please put everything on hold. Of course, she said. And for what it's worth, this isn't how these conversations usually go. No, I said, it isn't. I hung up and sat still for a moment. Claire wasn't just reacting emotionally, she was maneuvering. That afternoon, Daniel came home early again. She called my office, he said flatly. That was a choice, I replied. She asked my assistant for schedules, asked when I'd be free to meet. I didn't say anything. I told them to block her, for now. That surprised me. You don't have to do that for me, I said. I'm not doing it for you, he replied. I'm doing it because this crossed a line. He was angry now. Not explosive, controlled, focused. She doesn't get to plan your life behind my back, or mine. That evening, Daniel sat down and did something I hadn't seen him do in years. He slowed down. He canceled meetings, cleared his calendar, stayed home. We ate dinner together, just the two of us. No staff, no distractions. I keep thinking I missed something obvious, he said. You didn't miss it. You trusted someone you loved. He shook his head. I trusted her more than I paid attention. That happens, especially when you're busy building something. He sighed. I didn't think my success would complicate things like this. It always does, I said gently. Money magnifies whatever's already there. The next day, Claire sent an email, not to me, to Daniel. Long, emotional, carefully worded. She talked about stress, about pressure, about feeling unappreciated, about how she was only trying to help. She didn't apologize. That told me everything. Daniel showed me the email without saying a word. What do you think? He asked. I think she's scared. Of what? I asked. Of losing control and of being seen clearly. He nodded slowly. That afternoon, Daniel called a lawyer, not aggressively, not defensively, just responsibly. "I need clarity," he said, afterwards, "about boundaries, about what's appropriate." "Good," I said. Claire called again that night. This time, Daniel answered. I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I heard enough. "No," he said calmly, "that's not acceptable. We'll talk when things cool down." "No, I'm not choosing sides. I'm choosing what's right." He hung up and leaned back against the counter. "That was hard," he admitted. "I know," I said. "She thinks you're influencing me," he added. I almost laughed. Almost. She's used to influencing quietly. Loud truth feels like manipulation to people like that. He nodded. A few days passed. The house stayed calm. Predictable. Mine again. I resumed my routines. Walks, reading, phone calls with old friends. Daniel checked in often, but not in a hovering way. He treated me like an adult. Claire didn't like that. She sent one more message. This one was colder. She mentioned future expectations, long-term planning, clear roles. Daniel read it once and deleted it. "I'm done with this version of the conversation," he said. The next step came quietly. Daniel told me he'd asked Claire to attend counseling together. She refused. "I don't need to be fixed," she told him. "That tells me something," he replied. A week later, she moved more of her things out. The separation wasn't official, but it was real. I could see the grief in Daniel's eyes, but also relief. "I didn't realize how tense things had become," he said one night. "You get used to pressure until it's gone." One evening, as we sat on the porch, Daniel asked me something unexpected. "Did you ever think about leaving?" he asked. I considered it. "Yes," I said, "but not because of you." "Why then?" "Because I wanted to see how you handled it when you finally saw everything clearly," I replied. He looked at me. "And?" I said, "And you did the right thing." He exhaled. "I learned something," he said. "What's that?" "That being successful doesn't mean you stop listening. It means you have to listen harder." I smiled. That was my son. Claire didn't disappear after that, but her influence did. The advisors stopped calling, the plans dissolved, the pressure lifted. Daniel set clear boundaries, and I stayed, not as a guest, as family. I thought the hardest decisions were behind us. I was wrong, because the final move Claire made, months later, when everything seemed settled, forced Daniel to choose between the future he planned and the values he was raised with.
Time has a way of smoothing the edges of hard moments. After Claire moved most of her things out, the house settled into a new rhythm. Not a perfect one, but a healthier one. Daniel threw himself into work for a while, the way he always did when he needed distance from his own thoughts. I didn't push him to talk. I knew better than that. Some conversations need space before they're ready. I focused on my routines again. Morning walks, coffee on the porch, phone calls with friends who reminded me I had a whole life before I ever stepped foot under that roof. The house no longer felt like it was closing in on me. I could breathe. Daniel noticed. "You seem lighter," he said one evening as we sat outside, watching the sky fade into dusk. "I feel steadier," I replied. He nodded. "Me too." For a while, it seemed like that might be the end of it. Claire stayed distant, occasional texts to Daniel about logistics, short, clipped, businesslike. No emotion, no warmth. That should have been my first clue. People like Claire don't usually walk away quietly when they believe they're owed something. The final move didn't come with anger or accusations. It came disguised as reason. Daniel came home late one night, his face tight in a way I recognized instantly. "She called my board chair," he said. I set my book down slowly. "About what?" "About me," he replied. "About us." About you." I didn't interrupt. "She framed it as concern," he continued. "Said she was worried I was being manipulated during a stressful period." There it was. She implied that decisions I'd made recently weren't fully my own, that I was under outside influence. I met his eyes. "Meaning me?" He nodded. I felt a flicker of something then. Not hurt, not fear, disappointment. "She went outside the family," I said quietly. "Yes, and outside the marriage." "What did you say?" I asked. "I told them the truth, that my decisions were informed, deliberate, and aligned with my values." He paused. "They asked for documentation." That surprised me. "Of what?" I asked. "Of boundaries, of clarity." I leaned back in my chair. "She's trying to force your hand," I said. "I know," he replied. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. I could hear him moving around upstairs, pacing, making calls. When morning came, he looked tired but resolved. "I need to handle this cleanly," he said over breakfast, "once and for all." "How?" I asked. "I'm calling a meeting, with legal counsel, with the board, with Claire." That caught my attention. "All together?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "No more side conversations, no more narratives built in the dark." I nodded slowly. "That's wise." He hesitated. "I don't want this to hurt you." "It won't, as long as you stay honest." The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Claire agreed to attend. That alone told me she thought she still had leverage. The days leading up to it were quiet but tense. Daniel prepared carefully, reviewed records, documented timelines, made sure every decision he'd made recently could stand on its own merit. I watched him with a mix of pride and sadness. No parent wants their child to go through this kind of reckoning, but sometimes growth comes wrapped in discomfort. The day of the meeting arrived faster than expected. Daniel dressed more formally than usual. No casual blazer, no rolled sleeves. He looked like the version of himself the world respected, the one who didn't flinch. "Wish me luck," he said with a faint smile. "You don't need luck, you need clarity, and you already have that." He nodded and left. I stayed home. That was important. This wasn't my confrontation. It never was. The meeting lasted hours. When Daniel returned that evening, he looked drained but lighter. "She didn't expect the questions," he said, sinking into the chair across from me. "What kind of questions?" I asked. "Specific ones, about timelines, about who authorized what, about why she contacted people without my knowledge." I nodded. "Sunlight tends to do that." "She tried to frame it as concern," he continued, "but when they asked for examples, it fell apart." "Because concern without consent doesn't hold," I said. He smiled faintly. "Exactly." Daniel leaned forward. "They asked her directly why she thought I wasn't capable of making my own decisions." "And?" I asked. She didn't have an answer that didn't sound like control. That told me everything. "What happens now?" I asked. She backed down, not publicly, but clearly. She agreed to step away from any involvement in my work, in my decisions. "And your marriage?" I asked gently. He exhaled. "I don't know if we can come back from this, not because of the conflict, but because of what it revealed." "That's fair," I said. "She saw you as an obstacle, not as my mother, not as family." "I know," I said. He shook his head. "I missed it." "You didn't miss it," I corrected. "You saw it when it mattered." That night, Daniel made another decision. He asked Claire for space, real space, no calls, no messages, time to think. She didn't take it well. The messages started coming again, emotional this time, accusatory, then defensive, then apologetic.
Daniel didn't engage. "I can't fix something that was built on control," he said. Weeks passed, slowly, deliberately. Claire's attempts to reinsert herself into the narrative faded. The board stood behind Daniel. His advisors respected his clarity. The pressure evaporated. One evening, Daniel sat with me again, the way he had when he was younger and needed grounding. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Go ahead," I replied. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" I thought about that carefully. "Because I wanted you to see it with your own eyes," I said. "If I'd pushed earlier, it would have felt like conflict. Now it feels like truth." He nodded. "I'm grateful." "For what?" "For not making me choose," he replied, "until there was no other honest option." I smiled softly. That was the moment I knew he'd grown past this. Claire moved fully out not long after that. No big announcement, no spectacle, just distance. Daniel began rebuilding his life with intention. Slower dinners, fewer assumptions, more listening. And me? I stayed. Not because I had to, but because I was wanted. I thought that would be the end of the story. But months later, a letter arrived, unexpected and carefully worded, that forced one final conversation, one that would determine whether this family truly healed or simply learned to move on.
The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Not registered, not marked urgent, just a plain envelope with my name written neatly on the front. No return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Claire. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the side table near the window and made myself a cup of tea. Old habits. When something feels heavy, I slow everything else down. I've learned that rushing only makes things louder than they need to be. When I finally sat down and opened it, the letter was longer than I expected. Carefully written, measured, not emotional, but not cold either. She didn't apologize right away. That mattered. She started by acknowledging the distance, the silence, the months that had passed since she'd last been under the same roof as me. She wrote about how much time she'd had to think, how stepping away from everything had forced her to confront parts of herself she hadn't wanted to see. Then, halfway down the page, she wrote the line that stopped me. I didn't realize how threatened I felt by you until I no longer had any control. I read that sentence twice. She went on to admit that living alongside someone who didn't need power, someone who didn't compete for space, had unsettled her, that she mistook quiet confidence for weakness, that she believed managing people was the same as caring for them. She never asked for forgiveness. Instead, she asked for a conversation. I folded the letter and sat there for a long time, watching the light shift across the floor. When Daniel came home that evening, I handed it to him without saying a word. He read it slowly, carefully. "She wants to talk," he said. "Yes," I replied. "Do you?" he asked. I thought about that. "Yes," I said. "I think I do." We agreed on one condition. The conversation would happen in the open. No side comments, no rewriting history, just honesty. Claire arrived the following weekend. She looked different, not polished, not guarded, just human. We sat in the living room, the same room where so many small, quiet moments had once felt heavy. She spoke first. "I was wrong," she said simply. Daniel didn't interrupt. Neither did I. She continued, "I thought control meant stability. I thought if I managed everything, nothing would fall apart." She paused, then looked at me. "I didn't realize how threatened I felt by you until I no longer had any control." I appreciated the honesty. I've lived long enough to know fear wears many disguises. Control is one of them, I said calmly. She nodded. I know I crossed lines, she said, and I know I don't get to undo that. No, I agreed, but understanding matters. Daniel spoke next. I needed to hear that, not because it fixes everything, but because it tells me where we're standing. Claire took a breath. I'm not asking to come back, she said. I'm asking to move forward without pretending nothing happened. That was the right thing to ask. The conversation lasted hours. No yelling, no blame games, just truth laid out carefully, one piece at a time. By the end, we were all tired, but lighter. When Claire left that evening, she hugged me. Not tightly, not dramatically, just respectfully. Weeks passed. Life didn't snap back into place overnight. Healing rarely works that way. Daniel continued to rebuild his life intentionally. He slowed his pace. He listened more. He made space. For me, for himself, for clarity. Claire and Daniel remained separated, but civil, thoughtful, honest. And me? I found my footing again. Not because the house changed, but because my place in it was finally clear. One evening, Daniel and I sat together on the porch, watching the city lights blink on in the distance. I used to think wealth was the biggest responsibility I'd ever carry, I said. And now? I asked. Now I think it's awareness, knowing when something feels off and being brave enough to look at it. I smiled. That lesson took me a lifetime to learn, I said. I'm glad you learned it sooner. He looked at me. I didn't learn it alone. That meant more than he knew. I eventually moved into my own place again, close enough to visit, far enough to keep my independence. Daniel helped me pick it out himself. This one feels right, he said. It does, I agreed. On moving day, he hugged me tightly. Thank you for staying, he said. Thank you for listening, I replied. Now, when people ask me what it was like living under my son's roof, I tell them the truth. My son's wealth never changed him, but living under his roof changed everything. It showed me the quiet ways power can shift, the subtle ways respect can disappear if no one is paying attention, and the strength it takes not to fight, but to stand still long enough for the truth to surface. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand. I waited. And in the end, that patience made all the difference. If you feel comfortable, I'd appreciate it if you left a like on this video. It helps these quiet stories reach the people who might need them most. You can subscribe to the channel if you'd like to hear more stories like this. Stories about love, endurance, and the things we carry longer than we should. And if you want to, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read them, truly. Knowing this story traveled farther than my living room gives me more comfort than you might imagine. Thank you for sitting with me. Take care of yourself, and take care of the people you love.